Welcome everybody to The Split, the young adult book review show for readers and writers. I'm Robert Scanlon from the Dreamer Chronicles, and you might be wondering where on earth is Brian. He is here, but his voice has been fading a little bit, so I'm doing the introduction just to save him from speaking too much. So that's Brian Cohen from the Ted Saves the World series. Brian, how is that voice going today?
It's getting a little better. I did a podcast yesterday and it was pretty bad, so I figured talk as little as possible.
Which is a bit tricky when you're doing a book review show, isn't it?
It is, but I've got my tea, got my throat coat, I've got my water. I should be able to make it.
And you've got your co-host about to lead us into our book review this week, which is City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, or Cassandra Clare, depending on where you come from. And a little bit of controversy about this book. You know, it's kind of loved and hated. But how about I start with the summary, Brian, just to save your voice?
Go for it.
So, City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. Clary Frey, 15, and her best friend Simon are out clubbing in the trendy Pandemonium Club when Clary accidentally stumbles across some demon hunters. Demon hunters that she shouldn't be able to see because their magic hides them to mundies or mundane humans. She witnesses one of the leaders, Jace, dispatch the demon in a violent manner and is horrified. Simon rushes into the room and sees nothing. Clary is disturbed by these events and doesn't know what to make of them until she spots Jace again several days later and confronts him, demanding to know more. Their conversation is cut short when Clary receives a chilling distress call from her mother, and her world begins a rapid descent into a hell populated by werewolves, vampires, warlocks, and shadow hunters. So I already had, unfortunately, it's one of those books that it's sort of the wave of some, rebel reviews had reached me prior to reading it. So I really did try to read it with an open mind. I did find it both a little silly, and also I found it kept me captivated enough to read the whole thing. One thing I did come across it's even on the product description page itself. Apparently the audio on the product description page has a review and it pans it. Why would you put that on your book description page? So
that is so funny.
How was the audio, Brian?
I'll tell you what, one of my favorite young actresses was the narrator, Mae Whitman, who's on several shows that I've watched. She was on Arrested Development, Parenthood. She's great. And so I was willing to forgive like 30% of anything wrong with the book. So the narration was very good. She was very good.
Okay. Well, look, let me lead off with my first, reader sort of perspective. For me, I thought I was caught. It's a silly story that really doesn't read well in lots of places. In order to advance the plot, people kind of turn to each other and explain things or explain parts of the plot, which is never really the best way to construct a story. It's a little lazy. But on the other hand, it was kind of entertaining enough, So it was. This to me is a book for a long plane flight. It's harmless. It's kind of fun. Claire she's a bit of a Mary Sue character. So, look, I've read way worse. Put it that way. I can't say I'll be rushing to complete the series anytime soon. And a warning for the under-15s, this is definitely not for you. This is explicit sexual references, there's drug use, there's gory violence, and even incest. So I probably would stay away from that unless you're over 15. What did you think, Brian?
Well, I was with it. I was on board until one of the main characters gets turned into a rat and they need to find their rat friend. I was totally on board. I'm telling you, I was like going, it was fine. I was enjoying it. And then the rat quest, as I call it here in my notes, the rat quest had nothing for me and it took me out of it for that entire session. And I feel as though they didn't really get much out of that. I think there was a plot point they wanted to come back around to later, and they needed the rat quest to happen for that.
Yes.
But it wasn't worth it for me. So I think the rat quest was too far. I think you should be able to take some road trips in a book. It doesn't have to always be straight and narrow the entire way. But this was too far of a road trip for me personally.
That's right. And I like the way that, that she's he's turned into, her best friend gets turned into a rat, so she pops him in her backpack, and then discovers that the backpack's been slit open and a vampire has run off with the rat. Okay. So you struggled to suspend disbelief in that.
I just wanted to keep going with the story, and I felt
Right.
like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
wasn't the story.
Yep. It was a side
I felt
story.
like that totally could have been cut out, and they could have figured out another way to loop in the werewolves and the vampires.
So maybe when you get your fan fiction going, you can turn that rat story into a novella.
Great idea. Just what I want to do. Just what I want to do.
Let me continue with the reader perspectives. There was another thing that struck me as well is there are some really fast paced action sequences which actually aren't all that bad,
Yeah.
except for the fact that in the middle of them, all of a sudden you find two or three people chatting to each other. And a couple of times this happened to me. I had to stop, flick back a few paragraphs. Hang on a minute, were they just fighting? And it was as if there'd been this sudden freeze frame. Well, hold on, let's just freeze the action here while I turn to Jace. Jace, are you saying that you knew my mother too? It was just like, hang on a minute, there's a crazed zombie rushing for you at the moment. You shouldn't be stopping to chat.
Maybe they were back to back. I don't know.
I think it was meant to do that, but you know what? And I've just recently finished Portal Combat. You do that brilliantly. And so,
Thank you.
in your action sequences, I've got the movie in my head. I've got the fact that there's Butch, Cassidy, and the other guy back to back, firing their guns away. Yeah, I get that, but this just didn't seem to work. And maybe the conversation itself was too conversational, and there didn't seem to be enough little cues in there to say, Clary, quickly parried a thrust from the vampire and leaned back to Jace and said blah blah blah. So I know it's kind of halfway between reader and writer, but to me as a reader, that stopped me in my tracks in the same way that the Rat Quest did for you. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I could see that taking you out of it for sure. There's a big spoiler at the end of the book, and we don't have to go into it too much. You already said incest was a thing. I don't know. I mean, unless it comes back around to really mattering in the later books. I mean, I actually knew pretty early on, I was able to figure out that was the case.
Yes.
That that was a relationship there. I'm trying to stay vague, but it's going to spoil people, whatever.
Yeah.
I had a feeling it was going in that direction, and then it did go in that direction, and I don't know. I mean, does it need to? I mean, it's just creepy at that point. Because, like, let's say Luke and Leia in Star Wars.
Yes.
Leia kisses Luke on the cheek, and that he has a little crush on her.
Yeah.
And then they find out they're brother and sister. No big deal.
Yeah.
But then you got this.
It's full on making out.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just it just unsettles the reader, but not in a way that you want them to be unsettled, I guess.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Yeah, you kind of go sort of okay. Was that really necessary? And well, look, we'll come to it when we get to the writer's perspective, I guess. What did you think about the one of the other things that's often levelled at this book, which is that Claire seems to have pulled in every single fantasy trope that she could possibly lay her hands on. Did that bother you at all?
Well, this is one of my writer takeaways,
Right.
but I think when you take a bunch of different ideas and put them in a blender, it can become your own. We've kind of talked about that before.
Yes.
So I have no problem with that personally. I'm a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as you know.
Yes.
And Buffy pulls in tropes from wherever. I used to be a big fan of Xena, the warrior princess,
Ooh.
which pulled in even different time periods together and said, yeah, they all happen while Xena's alive. And it totally doesn't make sense,
Right.
but it's entertainment. So I don't personally mind that much. Did you mind?
It was, when was it? It was, I think, when the vampires suddenly had demon powered motorcycles that flew, and then were in a big fight with the werewolves during the rat quest, that I suddenly started to think, what the It's, yeah, okay, well, a dragon's going to fly through the roof any minute, it just didn't, I think where the story could have been really clever is this gradual unfolding of the exposure to what turns out to be, a world that Clary really does come from, of course, and there's no surprises there. But yeah, it was just, I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of that and the fact that the dialogue was super cheesy at times. That just it's, to me, it's a magazine read. Like I said before, it's kind of, you pick it up on a plane, read it. It's not going to do you any harm. You're going to have some fun action sequences. It's kind of okay. You're probably going to be able to spot what's going to happen. Everything pretty much from about the first two chapters. So
Yeah.
In that respect, it's a fairly naively written story, which probably leads us into the whole writer's perspective thing.
Yes.
Would you like to take that away? You said you had some things there that were...
Well, you had a point there that we could have seen more from the new person seeing the world unfold, not having been a part of this world before with Clary. And I mean, I think she still gets mileage out of it, because you get the explanation, and you said there was too much, and there probably was too much exposition throughout, but it's justified when it's a person who doesn't know anything.
Oh, yes.
And in this case, two people, because you got Simon in there too.
Yes.
So I think it's always a great idea. It's always a good trope for a writer to have someone, if you're doing a new world, have someone who doesn't know the world entering it, and then you'll be able to explain it as much as you feel is necessary.
Yes, from a writer's perspective, I think this should always be in a timely fashion, so that we don't have to suddenly get a meeting of everybody around the desk while we spend the next 3 or 4 pages explaining everything that's been going on and everything that's sure to be coming. So that was the thing that bothered me. But yeah, I totally agree. I think that is one of the wondrous things about science fiction and fantasy, is that as a reader, you're wanting to be led somewhere, and we've talked about this before, transported. And in some way, that can happen when the naive character new to the world sits down, and all of a sudden the wise commander who's got in charge of the empire, fills them in on something that's important to that particular moment. And I just felt that at times this was not done very gracefully or subtly in this particular story. But this is another example, though, isn't it, of a young adult book killing it? Something.
Yes, something. It just got picked up for a TV series.
Wow.
Even though the movie failed, it got picked. It's going to be called Shadowhunters.
Well, that's a nice title. Nice. Mm-hmm. Look, to me, I mean, you mentioned Buffy before. To me, this kind of trope-driven fantasy series, and look, let's hope that the rest of the series gets better anyway. It does really lend itself to a TV series, with one-off action sequences. The whole rat quest can be one episode, which I know you'll be dying to watch.
That's my must see. I'll DVR that.
But you're right. I mean, they have a huge following, so they wouldn't have picked up a TV series. The agent wouldn't have been able to sell it unless there is a huge following. And where I live, these books are still displayed prominently in all the bookshops in the young adult section. So, and we actually nearly bought City of Bones as a birthday present for my daughter's best friend, who's only 12, but her older sister, who is just about to turn 15, said, "Nuh-uh, too old for you, can't read it." And I'm glad she said that, because I would have been quite disturbed giving this book to a 12-year-old kid. Oh,
yeah, but it's tough to know, because
I know.
they don't. You didn't have the split to watch beforehand to tell you.
What a great plug! Aren't we just fantastic? Aren't we? Hey, what did you?
We're just so great.
What did you think about the prose? Did you see any purple prose in there?
For sure, but there's purple prose in all of these kinds of books. I did feel that there were good visceral points where I did have a very good picture of what was going on, who was where. I'm just remembering back to Clary getting attacked in her mom's apartment for the first time. I feel like I knew what was happening. I knew where she was bleeding. I could see everything well.
Yes.
So I didn't really
Yes.
I didn't have a problem with purple prose that stuck out to me. The rat quest was really the
That was
only
the
thing
big thing.
that took me out. That was the big thing. The purple prose, if there was some, it didn't take me out of it because I guess I was invested enough
Yes.
in the story. But did you have some purple prose problems?
I did some pretty purple prose problems. I think maybe with the audio narration, if you've got a really good actress narrating, then to some extent they lend their own performance to the story and they can diminish the emphasis on the purple prose quite easily, I think, by how
Yeah.
they pace it. So, the dialogue and the action sequences can be brought forward every time the actress is having to do a mini period of setting a scene or something and it's a bit too purple. They can either really rush through that or give it a lower tone or back off on the emphasis. So I suspect there's a little bit of difference there because there were times where I'm reading a sentence and I go, oh, please, you just didn't need to put it that way. It was just somebody trying too hard. They didn't need to. Because the bones of it are probably a good story, albeit stolen. As I've said in my last writer point, this is kind of, when Harry met Voldy met Darth, because and apparently Cassandra Clare was a massive fan fiction writer for the Harry Potter world. And the Jace character is actually a complete cut and paste of her Draco fan fiction trilogy. So that was an interesting one to find out. So it just shows you, doesn't it, that you can, as a writer, you can get somewhere if you're prepared to put some effort into fan fiction.
And here's the thing: she has this great series that's doing great. You might not think it's great. I don't even know where I am on that spectrum, but it's doing great. And now she has like the prequel series, and she has all these spin-off novellas. She's being smart with how she's doing this. She's milking this brand for all it's worth, and it's worth a lot.
Yes.
To the general populace.
Yes. So you think I'm just being too cranky? That's what you're saying. It's a good book. It's caught attention. Back off.
May Whitman was great in her performance in this, and the rat thing was dumb. Those are my notes. Those are my notes.
So should we go into our takeaways?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Do you want to lead or shall I lead? How would you like that?
You might have more takeaways than me.
Okay, let me lead. Apparently, takeaway number 1. Apparently, you can have every fantasy creature known to man star in one book and still have people love it. Oh, wait, no dragons yet.
That's too much. Yeah, for now. Good takeaway. My takeaway is that, let's see, I think let's go with the newbie in the paranormal world, because when you have someone who doesn't understand things, then it makes more sense for you to explain than if you have a bunch of experts who are saying, well, how do we kill this thing? And what is this thing anyway? It makes a lot more sense if someone just doesn't know what's going on. So I think the newbie in the paranormal world is something you can get a lot out of. I think back to something like Matched, where everyone is in the world, knows the world, or even the selection. So the explanation of where they are, where they're going, what's happening, it's more of like a diary kind of explanation, but you still wouldn't explain everything as much as you are explaining it. With the newbie, you're going to explain the newbie stuff to the newbie. So it makes more sense. Whether or not it's well done, it makes more sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I recall here from, and just before we go on to the last takeaway, in Stephen King's book on writing, he talks about the ability to include exposition, backstory when needed. And Stephen King actually says that one of the masters of this is J.K. Rowling. And if you think about keeping that Voldemort story going across 7 books, and each book having to effectively reset the scene because maybe new readers came in at that stage. Maybe a 15-year-old reader came in who didn't want to read the books when Harry was 11. So I actually went back to reread some of the first opening chapters of a couple of the other books. This was a couple of years ago I did this. And he's right. It is really well done because this is a world that a lot of people are already familiar with. So you can't go into great lengths, but you've also got to sort of reset the scene, haven't you? Each time you've got to kind of, okay, what is Hogwarts? What does it mean to receive an owl? All that kind of stuff. And she just very quickly covers it, moves on. So I do think that it's something that definitely adds to a story, and there are ways to do it well and ways not to do it well. And for sure, Cassandra Clare could improve the way she does it. There's no question about that. But you're right, that whole idea of having a newbie in a new paranormal world and uncovering things is really interesting. And maybe that's what kept it interesting to me, is the fact that I wanted to keep finding out more.
Yeah. I'm sure she has more that she'll tell you in books 2, 3, and the other.
Which brings
the other spin-offs.
Famous
takeaway 3.
Takeaway 3. I actually think this book is, even though I've sounded very cranky about it, it's worth reading to see what the fuss is about. And again, to get a sense, if you're a young adult writer, especially, or if you're a fan of young adult fiction, you've probably already read it anyway. But kind of say like Divergent or like The Hunger Games or other really popular books in this genre, it's really worth reading. Just because some things I didn't get, well, so what? This is a 15-year-old girl who suddenly finds herself thrown into a paranormal world. Well, that's kind of, that's one of the big young adult tropes. So go read it. Go read it. Ignore me.
Ignore Robert.
Yeah, and skip the rat quest, just turn the pages.
You don't need anything in that.
You don't need that. No. The rat survives. Goodness sake.
Yeah. So I've got an improvised prompt.
Improvised prompt. Whoa. We are adding so much value today.
Oh, I know.
Take it away.
All right. So your parents have sat you down in the living room to tell you that they have a secret life they've never shared with you before this point. What is their big secret, and are you able to keep it going forward? How does your life change after finding out your parents' true identity? So,
I've always suspected my parents.
I know.
So they keep telling me those little bulges were just where they bumped their head, but they're horns. They've got to be horns.
Yeah. I agree. You can answer this past week's prompt on thesplitbookreviews.com, and you can leave us a review at iTunes, and you can just send us an email on the Split Book Reviews using our contact form. We'd love to hear from you. We've got a couple of books coming up that were recommended by other authors and readers, so we're excited to touch upon those.
Yes, a big shout out to everybody whose names will be mentioned actually possibly in next week's episode. We'll do a little bit of a run through. It's been lovely to hear some positive feedback as well, which has been great, Brian, that folks are enjoying the show, but more than that, they're suggesting books they've loved, and we'll read and we'll see how cranky I get about them. So as Brian said, let's leave us a review on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, write your response to the prompt in the comments on the Split Reviews. What is it? The splitbookreviews.com.
Splitbookreviews.com, yeah.
I don't even know the URL of my own website. Can you believe that? Next week, what are we reviewing next week, Brian?
We're reading Delirium by Lauren Oliver.
This is our first return author, isn't it?
Our first double author, yeah. Pretty exciting.
Well, we look forward to catching up with everybody next week. Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. Any closing words, Brian?
No, thanks for carrying the load, Robert.
Yeah, it's no problem. These are my closing words, which are, no, Cassandra Clare, I am your father.
Thank you guys for watching. Somewhere on this page is a subscribe button to the Split channel. We do reviews every week. We would love it if you followed us every single week. Isn't that right, Robert?
That's exactly right. Follow us now. Hit the subscribe button.
Do it.